one more guest here for this Tuesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Mr. Philip-Rossman Reich from Orlando Magic Daily. Philip, how's it going today, man?
It's going good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Appreciate your time here, sir. I know it's a busy part of the holiday season for you. Everything so far so good?
Everything is going well so far. I mean, I'm celebrating Hanukkah. I'm celebrating Star Wars. So it's been a fun holiday season so far.
You a Star Wars guy?
Of course, I'm a Star Wars fan. I actually haven't seen Last Jedi yet. I had stuff I had to do. I couldn't get out to the theater, so I'm going to see it tonight. So no spoilers, please.
I gotta say, I mean, honestly, I've never gotten into it, but what I do know is that anybody that is interested in it is like trying to avoid everything that he or she possibly can about the movie. And I don't know. I feel like with all the spoilers that, you know, my wife has seen for Walking Dead or when True Blood was on or whatever else, I don't know how you avoid that stuff.
Yeah, you're very thankful for articles that say spoilers ahead, and you want to click and read all of them, but you just got to have a lot of self-control. I think among Star Wars fans, there's a healthy level of respect. We don't want to ruin the magic for anyone else. We wouldn't want it done to us, so we won't do it to anyone else. And so I think that it all works out in the end. I've successfully avoided any spoilers. I'm going to rewatch Force Awakens this afternoon, and then I'm going to head to the theater and enjoy the film. I've read enough reviews to kind of get a sense that okay, this is going to be a little bit different, but I don't have any plot points ruined. So I hopefully I'll enjoy the film.
I kind of wonder what it's like to actually want to go and see a movie. I sort of feel like lately I've just gone to the movies exclusively to get movie theater popcorn and then sat through something that I kind of wanted to see. So hopefully you enjoy that movie here tonight. And, I guess we'll talk NBA here. That's something I can actually keep up with as opposed to Star Wars with you. This week, obviously pretty unique in the sense that everybody has a scheduled day off on Sunday. A lot of teams, I think, 20 teams have a day off on Monday while we've got those marquee games that are on Christmas Day. And, of course, that's, all-day coverage on the major networks showing those games. So does this week have a different feel in your mind, Philip?
Obviously it has a little bit of a different feel because I think the players, sense that it's the holiday season. And yeah, they play over Christmas. The schedule does not stop just because there's a holiday. But there's definitely a little bit of a different feeling. I mean, I think I think we talked about this the last time I was on, but players kind of know that Christmas is a milestone in the season. It's obviously the big day when the NBA announces itself nationally on ABC, on the major broadcast networks. Christmas is their day, essentially to own the sports calendar for a day in the middle of football season. So it's definitely very much a big day, and players sense that. And I think, we're especially with the way the schedule is now, with it being moved up 2 weeks, we're closer and closer to the middle of the season. I cover the Magic. We're at game 31 already, so we're nearing the midpoint of the season already, if it's hard to believe. And so I think teams already are beginning to sense that, okay, Christmas is here. That's when the season kind of officially gets started, or it becomes more serious that, okay, this is who we are as a team. This is what we need to do to get better. And so I think that in addition to kind of taking the deep breath that is having the holiday season, I mean, teams will obviously be doing stuff in the community, and everyone has their families to talk to and have the holidays with. But at the same time, it's also it's time to get serious. Now we're getting into the meat of the season, and we either got to save our season or we got to maintain what we've got. And even GMs and general managers and basketball executives will be thinking, how do I make this team better? Now is the time to do it.
Well, before we look specifically at this week, then, I guess I'll kind of ask you about this since we're talking about it. As you said, the season started about a week and a half, 2 weeks earlier than it generally does. Usually, as you mentioned, this Christmas time is sort of, all right, time to flip the switch. Let's be the team that we're supposed to be. Do you feel like because we're a little bit more advanced in the season now, that period that a lot of people traditionally think of as kind of a downtime, late January, early February, the time between holidays, while you're looking ahead to the All-Star break and a few days off, do you feel like some of those tweener types of teams may be a little bit more aggressive, either in terms of, trying different lineup combinations or something like that, or on the flip side, maybe selling and getting involved in the trade market a little bit earlier?
Yeah, it's really uncharted territory because I mean I've talked to a few people about this, and for at least for a lot of veterans, there's always a rhythm to the season. Like their bodies kind of know, they've been through the grind so much, their bodies kind of know when it's time to pick up the level of play, or just like any of us. I mean, we kind of know when it's what time of year it is, and when it's time to kind of go about picking up the pace or doing something different, or, what's going on. And so moving the schedule up 2 weeks, if anything, I think it's had a bigger effect on the veteran teams. Some of the veteran teams got out to a slow start. You look at Cleveland, for instance. Cleveland got out to an incredibly slow start, and now, the season's picked back up. We've kind of hit that normal part of the season, and they've reasserted themselves and climbed to the second seed. Toronto's kind of just been solid throughout, and they've picked up their pace. Houston has picked up their pace. San Antonio has picked up their pace. Even a team like Minnesota, which has a fair amount of young guys, they've started to kind of get their groove and find their groove. And so mainly, I think that teams are looking to see whether they hit that groove, whether they kind of get that pace that they need to get. I think as far as general managers, the calendar doesn't change much for them. The trade deadline comes a little bit earlier this year. They're doing it before the All-Star break this year. So maybe there's a little bit more urgency in front offices because their calendar has completely changed. But I think everyone's really adjusting to this new rhythm of the season.
Well, and you look, too, I mean, a team like Oklahoma City has now won 7 of its last 10, so they're kind of rounding into form a little bit, too, because as you said, players just sort of have that internal calendar, that internal clock, so to speak, where, the season's not new anymore. You're not tired yet. You've kind of hit your stride. You're figuring out how to play with any new teammates that you do have. So, we do kind of see the cream rise a little bit. And, when we talked with you, I think it was 2 weeks ago, you're kind of looking at Detroit as a team that would fall off. Well, they've lost 7 of 10 and have actually won 3 straight. So they had dropped 7 in a row there. Milwaukee's a team that has kind of gotten it going a little bit, but they've dropped 3 straight now. So, the teams that we kind of highlighted in past segments here sort of playing out the way that we expected them to. We'll hit on a few more of those teams as we go throughout this segment here. But, Philip, one thing I do want to talk about is, as I mentioned, this week is a little bit different, and we've seen the NBA give these players more days off. But with the Christmas Eve break, with the Christmas break where only 10 of the teams are playing, lots of situations here this week where teams are playing 3 games in 4 nights, 4 and 6. There's even a couple 5 and 7s out there, which I know the league was really trying to limit. I know there's a few on the NHL side as well. But in terms of teams that just completely lack depth for these 3 and 4, 4 and 6, 5 and 7, 5 and 8, 6 and 9 type thing, who are those teams that are just going to get buried when they get these rough parts in the schedule?
Yeah, I think a team that we have to take a close look at is Indiana. The Indiana Pacers have been one of the nicer stories in the league throughout the season. They've had obviously a kind of most improved player run from Victor Oladipo, a team that a lot of people after trading Paul George, they thought that team would kind of collapse. And I wasn't quite sold on that. I thought they'd be in the playoff hunt. I thought that they might hang around the perimeter because they have some good players in Miles Turner. That they have a nice system. They have a good culture. And so I thought that they might be able to hang around. But Indiana's bench is a real big problem. I mean, they were playing only eight guys for a good chunk of the season at the beginning when they were playing at a really, really high level. If you go on to the site called hoopstats.com, they keep track of bench scoring, and Indiana has the 21st point differential among bench units. You look at some of the teams that have bad benches. There are a few that are decent teams, but Indiana, I think they're a young team. They're still relatively new. They got out to a faster start than everyone anticipated, and so it always seems natural that there could be that fall. And so their over-reliance on starters could eventually tire them out. Yes, the schedule is more spaced out, but when you hit those rough patches where you do end up playing 4 and 5 or 5 and 7 or 3 and 4, whatever it is, when you do end up playing all those games bunched together, or you're playing on a long road trip, that's where you need to rely on your depth. That's where you need depth, and that's something Indiana really doesn't have. They rely very heavily on their starters. Another team that doesn't rely very much on its depth is Oklahoma City, actually. I mean, I think everyone talks about their big 3 in Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Carmelo Anthony. But not only have some of those guys struggled, especially kind of Carmelo Anthony and Paul George fitting in there, not only have those guys struggled, they don't really have much offense outside of them. Steven Adams has been nice for them, but he's not a guy you can dump the ball into and get points. Andre Robertson is not an offensive player at all. Patrick Patterson is still kind of working his way back from injury, but, they don't have much creation outside of their big three. And so they're going to have to rely very, very heavily on their starters. And honestly, that might be one of the reasons why the team has struggled just a little bit. I mean, obviously they're playing much better now, and they're back to 500 and back in the playoff race, but they're not meeting expectations with the talent level they have. And I think you've got to look at their bench as a big reason why.
Yeah, I think those are two really good examples, and especially because, you have this Oklahoma City team that picked up a big three, and they wanted to rely heavily on those guys. But on the other side with a team like Indiana that started to pick up the pace, you would think that there would be a premium placed on, on establishing some depth there. And especially, with Paul George leaving, you want to get as many people as you can to try and replace that production. So I'm a little bit surprised that's something that they didn't address all that much. Maybe that's something that they're in the trade deadline market for.
Yeah, it might be something that they look for in the trade deadline. And it seems like Indiana feels like they're in the playoff race, so it depends what their long-term goals are. I mean, I think that Indiana is a team that they probably feel like they got their core pretty well established with Oladipo and Miles Turner. And so maybe they're looking to add that extra piece. They've got some good players. They got some good players coming off the bench, but really no impact players. So maybe there's someone out there that they really like that they can go after and get. And, maybe that's something I think the trade market is still developing. I think teams are still figuring out whether they're going to be buyers or sellers at the market. There could potentially be some good players for them to go out and get, and depending on what Indiana's willing to give up to make the playoffs this year or to kind of push themselves ahead in the future, maybe that's a direction that they go.
I like that you hit on a couple of teams that are relevant, that are right there in the playoff chase, because you very easily could have gone to teams like Atlanta or Chicago or Orlando, even Charlotte, teams that aren't very good. And the reason being, a lot of times they just don't have depth. Sometimes their frontline guys are pretty decent, but their depth guys, they just, don't have a whole lot to work with in that scenario. Are there any other teams that really do lack depth that, are noticeably going to struggle in those 3 and 4, 4 and 6 type spots?
It probably goes without saying, but Minnesota, they're a team, obviously Tom Thibodeau relies very heavily on his starters and to a point that it annoys fans and everyone's wondering what, he's going to wear these guys out. Your Karl-Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, Taj Gibson, all these guys play very, very heavy. Outside of really Tyus Edney, they don't have a lot of guys they don't have a lot of guys that really play a ton of minutes and provide a lot for them. And so, they've obviously played really, really well. I mean, they're sitting in, let me pull up my standings here. They're sitting in 4th place in the Western Conference and playing really, really well. But, who are they bringing off the bench right now? I mean, Tyus Jones has played well. Jamal Crawford's been okay. I think, maybe people think he's a little bit better than he is. But that's a team that relies very, very heavily on their starters. And so they may go through another lull and they fall down to like 5th or 6th in the West. They'll still be a playoff team, but they rely very, very heavily on their starters. And, God forbid, if someone gets hurt, that's when you're going to really feel the pain of not having a good bench.
I guess the flip side of that coin here is something that we should address rather quickly here is that, obviously Boston has some of the best depth in the NBA, and that's been a thing for Brad Stevens here, and they're remarkably good against the spread and back-to-backs on his watch. But who are some of the other teams that have good depth, maybe some of the teams that you wouldn't expect to be in decent shape in those 3 and 4, 4 and 6 type scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it now with Golden State, to be honest. They have surprisingly good depth, and Steve Kerr does such a good job keeping everyone on that roster engaged. He'll change his rotation up to get a guy in who hasn't played in a very long time, playing meaningful minutes, and so they really do trust guy 1 through 13. I mean, JaVale McGee was a key part of the finals last year. He's been mostly out of the rotation this year as they play Jordan Bell, as they play some of their other young players. And so right now, Golden State last night in LA was playing without Draymond Green and without Steph Curry. And yeah, the Lakers played them much closer than maybe most would believe. But the Warriors were still the Warriors. They still had the devastating run in them. They still found a way to pull out the win. And relying on Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Nick Young. Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, obviously all-stars, but being able to rely on a Nick Young to step up, or an Andre Iguodala to step up, or David West to step up. Patrick McCaw is a nice young player. the Warriors, you can't ever take them lightly so long as, Durant or Thompson are in. But they have guys who scrap and claw and fight, and they do not, have the typical, still a very hungry team, and they find ways to win even without key guys. And it's easy to say Golden State's really, really good. But, yeah, Golden State's really, really good.
So here's something I wanted to talk about with you here today, Philip, is aside from the obvious guys, you got LeBron, Russ, Curry, Durant, Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, James Harden, John Wall. It is a superstar-driven league in the NBA, but superstars aren't always out there, whether they have an injury or whether they're sitting. Sometimes they're just not going to be in the game. The market adjusts. Everybody knows that. We see significant line moves. We see the books try to get ahead of the action and adjust the numbers. But there are a lot of guys out there that are really solid players that just don't command that level of attention, whether it's in the mainstream media or in the betting markets. So if I asked you to name a few of those guys, I'm kind of curious, what direction you'd go in where teams would just be, in a little bit of a world of hurt without, some of these players.
Yeah, the guy that I think of most when it comes to if we're going to call MVP as most valuable player as a guy that completely changes a team when he's on or off the court. I'm going to go to a team that's struggling a little bit right now in the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte is 11-19 right now. Their statistical profile suggests they should be a little bit better, so maybe they're due to go on a win streak here soon. But everything on that team revolves around Kemba Walker. When Kemba Walker is on the floor, the Hornets have a plus 6.3 net rating, which means they outscore their opponents by 6.3 points per 100 possession. That is among the elite of the elite teams. So when Kemba Walker is on the floor, the Charlotte Hornets are a playoff team. I think that is fairly evident. When Kemba Walker is off the floor, when he's not on the floor, the Hornets are outscored by 16.1 points per 100 possessions. Essentially, when Kemba Walker is off the floor, Charlotte's offense goes in the tank. They only score 90.9 per 100 possession with Walker off the floor. Essentially, that whole team becomes a G League team or a very high lottery team when Walker is off the floor. So there may not be a player in the league right now that has a bigger effect on a team. And obviously you can't play Kemba Walker 48 minutes per game. That'd be insane. And he's just coming off a shoulder injury too. But he has been really underrated all year. I don't think anyone has really given him nationally the respect that he deserves. He's averaging 21.4 points per game, 6 assists per game. But very clearly when he is on the floor, he makes that team work. And Charlotte, a team that many thought could be a playoff team this year, I certainly did. I have a lot of respect for what the Charlotte Hornets have built. He is everything for them so far this year. And so he's the player that I point to as the guy that when he's on the floor, he completely changes the game for his team.
So that's kind of interesting in that, I look at Charlotte, and we talked about their home road split, I think, on the last segment that we had you on, and they're just 2-11 away from home this year. And I don't know if Walker has missed, predominantly road games versus home games or something like that. But it is very interesting in that he's such a high usage player, means so much to this team. And every road game presents a unique challenge, whether it's a standalone, a back-to-back, if you're on a road trip, some kind of thing like that. So that it kind of makes me wonder if that ties into why Charlotte's been so bad on the road, that it's hard for a guy like Kemba Walker with his usage to be fresh road game after road game after road game.
It's certainly part of it. I mean, I think when you're on the road, you have to rely on your depth a little bit more. And, we were talking about depth. The Hornets are not a deep team. I mean, obviously, when you take out one key player, the whole thing seems to collapse. So there's definitely something to that. Some of it is just, Walker's had his injuries, and I think that's led to some struggles. Charlotte, even last year, Charlotte was a team that played a lot of close games. The difference in their season when they made the playoffs 2 years ago and when they missed the playoffs last year was their ability to win close games. And Walker is a guy who can execute late in games, but if you ask me, close games are a toss-up. Good teams don't play close games; they avoid them. So I think that's part of Charlotte's problem is they don't have the depth to rely on to go out and win on the road. They're a team that does feed off the energy of their home crowd, and because they rely so heavily on one guy to generate most of their offense or to be part of their offense and spread the floor, that's obviously a huge part of the deal for the Hornets, that when you go on the road, you can't rely on that as much, and maybe not rely on the whistle. The Hornets are a team that gets to the foul line a lot too as a big part of their offense. it's just something that's difficult for them to translate out on the road. But obviously, Kemba Walker's an all-star. He's been an all-star before. It wouldn't surprise me if he's an all-star again this year. He's a guy that changes games, for that team, and is obviously their most valuable player. So, they're going to need a little bit more from him. I don't know if there's much more you can ask for him, but, they're going to need some other guys to step up too.
All right, so again, outside of, that chosen 10 or 12 players or something like that, are there any other guys, in that same breath as Kemba Walker that, just mean so much and don't really get the praise or attention for it?
I'm trying to think of other players that have that same kind of effect. I mean, I've done some work on the Hornets, so it's kind of fresh on my mind. I'm not.
I'll throw out a name for you here. How about Kyle Lowry?
Throw out a name. Kyle Lowry. That's actually one I was thinking about too. When you look at, the Raptors obviously have played some really good basketball of late, and very quietly played some very good basketball of late. Pulling up his stats, Kyle Lowry, the Raptors have a lot of guys who are playing really, really well right now. The Raptors are plus 8.4 net rating with Kyle Lowry on the floor. With him off the floor, they also have an 8.3 net rating. So he hasn't. So that team. The thing about the Raptors is, we talk a lot about depth. The Raptors have a surprising amount of depth. I'm looking at their splits. They have no player right now who has a negative net rating when they're on the court, and no player right now that has a negative net rating when they're off the court. So they're just a really balanced team, I think. They've gotten some great play from rookie OG Anunoby. They're getting great play from DeMar DeRozan. Serge Ibaka has played very well for them. Jonas Valanciunas has had some good minutes for them as well. They're kind. I'm a big Toronto Raptor fan. I love what they do. I think that they go very unappreciated. DeMar DeRozan is one of the best kind of low post wings in the style of what Kobe Bryant did later in his career around the league. Kyle Lowry is a flamethrower, and I think everyone is hungry to see them do better in the playoffs. And honestly, what I appreciate about them is that they're a great regular season team, and I can get into this sidebar another day, but I'm a big fan of the regular season. I'm a big fan of the grind and the story of the everyday season, and I find it such a different challenge. And so, seeing the Raptors playing this well and just causing teams so much problems on a night in, night out basis, I think that deserves a lot of respect. And so I don't think people give Toronto quite the credit that they're due. We talked about the bench. They built a really strong team where they have a lot of really good bench guys and guys that can come in and fill in roles and play at a very high level. I haven't even mentioned Norman Powell, who, is a very promising young player as well. So Toronto, they just kind of do what they do. They just kind of do what they do. There's really no other way to explain it.
Well, I think that actually wound up being kind of a happy accident they're talking about Toronto, because in the West, everybody talks about the big three: Houston, Golden State, San Antonio. San Antonio now getting Kawhi Leonard back obviously elevates that team to a different level. In the East, you don't hear about Toronto. You hear about Boston. You hear about Cleveland. Toronto's sitting there at 20-8. They've got the highest point differential per game of any team in the Eastern Conference, and nobody talks about them. And the fact that they're as good without Kyle Lowry on the floor, man, it sounds to me like they're just a very underrated team in general.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from kind of playoff perception. Let me break it down this way. I use a lot of kind of the advanced stats to discuss teams. So I've thrown net rating around a lot, which net rating is the differential between the points per 100 possessions you score and the points allowed per 100 possessions you give up. So it's a pace neutral way to look at points allowed and points scored. So what a lot of people believe is net rating is a better way to evaluate the standings and which teams are actually good or bad than your typical than your typical kind of raw point differential. But like you said, the Toronto Raptors have the top net rating in the Eastern Conference. In fact, the Golden State Warriors and Houston Rockets are kind of heads and tails above everyone else. Plus 12.2 net rating for the Warriors, plus 11.4 net rating for the Rockets. In third place is the Toronto Raptors at 8.4. So they're outscoring opponents by 8.4 points per 100 possessions. They've got a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. The Celtics are fourth at 4.8. So they have Toronto has kind of clearly separated themselves, at least in this metric, from the rest of the field in the Eastern Conference. And, they're kind of in that second tier behind Golden State, Houston, and ahead of the rest of the top teams in the league. Whether that's going to hold or not, I don't know. I think what Toronto has as far as perception-wise, they've not played well in the playoffs the last few years. I mean, DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry, they've had a lot of struggle in the playoffs. And for a lot of people, they don't want to believe what Toronto does until they show it in the playoffs. It's gonna be with Toronto the whole year is, okay, what are you going to do in April? What are you going to do in May? Are you going to make it to June? Those are the questions that the Toronto Raptors have to face down every time they step on the floor. The regular season, for a lot of these elite teams, is kind of pro forma. You're just kind of getting your spot set for the playoffs. Like I said, Toronto's a very dangerous regular season team. That's not a team you want to have to prepare for with only one day to prepare or on a back-to-back. They have so many weapons. They play a really strong defensive style. And to be frank, with a lot of with a lot of the fans or casual fans, they're not the most entertaining team in the world. DeMar DeRozan works a lot of long twos. They're just kind of very methodical and workmanlike, and so they don't really excite a lot of people. DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry aren't household names everywhere. So that definitely has a part to do with their outside perception. And so the question for them is always going to be, what are you going to do in the playoffs? Will this carry over to the playoffs, and can you perform and actually win a postseason series?
I want to look at a few specific games here, so maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into some of these teams. And we'll start with one of the games here on Tuesday night. Only 3 games on the NBA docket. Cleveland and Milwaukee. Cleveland up to a 2-point favorite at a lot of shops, 2.5 at Bovada. So public money driving the market here on the Cavaliers, who have already beaten Milwaukee twice this year and did so when they weren't playing particularly well. They won their second game of the season running away by 19 up there in Milwaukee. Won by 5 at home on November 7th when they were a 4-6 team coming into that game. So that was right about the time that, they started to turn things around a little bit. They were 5-7. Well, then all of a sudden they were 18-7. So, that's kind of when the Cavs started to get things going a little bit. Just a small favorite here on the road. And Philip, that always intrigues me to see the Cavs as a small favorite against somebody, because these are the types of games against that, upstart team with a superstar like Giannis. They show up for games like this. So is this a game that they show up for, you think?
I think it's absolutely a game that they show up for. I mean, I think Giannis Antetokounmpo, one of the best players in the league. I think he gets up for a game against LeBron James just like everyone else would. I mean, I think Cleveland is used to it at this point, where they get everyone's best shot. They take everyone's best shot every night they go out on the floor. So it wouldn't surprise me if we get a really entertaining game. This is a game that I have circled on my calendar for tonight as a game to watch. It's obviously got the big names, but these are 2 of the elite players in the league going up against each other. There's certainly not. You certainly want to keep an eye on this game. You certainly want to watch these 2 go at it. And so I think that this is definitely a game to keep an eye on and watch. And I think that Milwaukee's going to be up for it. They're playing really well right now. They're kind of riding their ship and making their move a little bit. But obviously Cleveland's Cleveland. They're playing really, really well too.
So as I mentioned, the Cavs were 5-7 at one point, and then they wound up making their way now to 23-8. So they've been on a significant run here. It's 18-1 over their last 19 games. Now their schedule gets very interesting. They play this game against Milwaukee, which, again, as evidenced by the line, should be a pretty tough one. Thursday against Chicago, a Bulls team that's not good, but is playing much, much better here of late. I think they've won 6 straight. Then they go to Golden State on Christmas. Play Sacramento and Utah. Home game on January 2nd. It is their only home game between Thursday's game and then January 15th when Golden State comes to town. So they play home against Portland, at Boston, at Orlando, at Minnesota, at Toronto, at Indiana. They tend to have a lot of problems with Indiana, and that's a look-ahead game to the Golden State game. So Cleveland here, they're playing extremely well. They look like the team everybody expected them to be. They'll get Isaiah Thomas back here probably after the first of the year. But the schedule steps up for them now, where they're playing a lot of road games and a lot of pretty good opponents. What do you think about the Cavs long term?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's Cleveland. It's Cleveland, so you've got to keep an eye on them. They've got the best player in the world in LeBron James, and so as long as they're focused and they're into the game, they are a threat. LeBron James is having another incredible season. The guy does not seem capable of slowing down. And so you have to always be on the lookout for them. It doesn't matter. I mean, they're the kind of team that, the schedule is toughening up, but they're the kind of team where you don't worry about the schedule because they're that good. They're probably the best team in the Eastern Conference still. I think they're still the favorites to reach the NBA Finals, making it 9 straight finals for LeBron James, or 8 straight finals for LeBron James. It's something insane like that. This is a team that you trust to be ready every single night. They're used to taking everyone's best shot. They're used to going into packed environments. I'm sure they're going to be a little bit more hyped for the game against Golden State because it's Golden State. That's another team that's kind of on their level that you can get up for. And I'm sure they'll get picked off here or there, but clearly Cleveland's in a good groove right now. They've kind of found their rhythm to their season. They won't continue this torrid pace that they're on, so maybe this is a part of the schedule where they'll take a few losses and kind of hover at 500 for a few games. But obviously, this is Cleveland. This is LeBron. They know how to take care of their business, and I don't think much is going to change for them.
In the world of sports where you've got so many incredible stats, DiMaggio's hit streak, you've got Florida State being in a bowl for 35 or 36 straight years. Detroit Red Wings made the playoffs for 25 straight years. How ridiculous is it to make the finals 8 straight times? I mean, that's almost unheard of.
I don't think it gets. It hasn't been done since the Celtics did it in the 60s. And they won 8 straight that at the time. I think they made 8 of 10 finals in the late 50s and 60s. I don't think what LeBron has done in making the finals 8 straight years is getting enough appreciation. I know everyone wants to compare LeBron to Jordan, and everyone's going to say, "Oh, Jordan went 6-0, and LeBron's lost in the finals a lot." And yeah, whatever. I mean, if that's the argument you want to make for who's the greatest, that's fine. Everyone has their own criteria. But when I talk to people who just seem to be hating on LeBron to hate on LeBron, or I say, look, take a pause here. LeBron James is the best basketball player that we've probably seen since Jordan, at the very least. Sorry, Kobe fans. But what LeBron is doing here, the amount of mental taxation it takes to go through an 82-game season, then play a 2-month-long playoffs, then to play these high-intensity games in the finals, win or lose, to go back the next summer, get better, go through another 82-game season, then another long playoff, then another finals, win or lose, and then do it all again and again and again for 8 years. I mean, I think even Jordan would admit that the third year in his three-peats were always very difficult. I mean, they almost lost to the Jazz. They almost lost to the Suns in the first time that they won their third championship, and then almost lost to the Jazz the second time. It took last-second shots from John Paxson and Michael Jordan to avoid Game 7 on the road. We could be talking about a very different, one shot, really. We're talking about a very different legacy for Michael Jordan, possibly. So it shows what balance, how precarious all this is. But to come back year after year after year after year and still win at this incredibly high level, get through this long marathon, I don't think we give it enough appreciation. With the salary cap the way it is, it's harder and harder to keep your team together and to stay relevant at a high level. And LeBron James obviously switched teams in the middle of this current streak. So to be this dominant, to reach the finals so many times in such a short, consecutively, I don't think we give it the appreciation that it deserves. We're really watching something that's incredibly special and deserves our praise and recognition.
And I think another thing that you hit on there is that he's gotten better. He may be a better player now than he was 7 or 8 years ago, just because of his feel for the game, of the way that he is able to manage his body, of the way that he's able to make everybody around him better. He's become more well-rounded of a player pretty much every year. And to do that after those long seasons, the short turnaround as he's gotten older, especially with he had his highest career usage in terms of minutes played, I think, last year ever, minutes per game, something like that, ever. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely unbelievable what this guy is doing. And obviously I've had a firsthand look at it being a Clevelander and, of course, hearing all the hype when he was at St. Vincent, St. Mary, and then even before that, before he even got to high school and people started talking about him. So, I've had that front row seat, but, man, I don't know if we've ever seen another player like that.
Realized. Yeah, and I think that's another thing people don't appreciate about him either. He's been under national scrutiny since he was 18. It's been, he was drafted in 2003? It's been, nearly 15 years of just of NBA scrutiny, and probably nearly 20 years of this guy's going to be the greatest. This guy's the king. I mean, he's been called the king since he was 10 years old, which is insane, and yet he's still a very humble guy. It seems a very humble guy, at least publicly. He gives a lot of himself to his community, which again is another part I don't think people give him enough credit for. And he plays basketball at the highest level. I mean, regardless of where you fall on the GOAT scale as far as LeBron James, I think we can safely say he's one of the 5 best players to ever play basketball, or at least play basketball in the NBA.
He's probably one of the 5 best athletes in any sport ever at this point, given what he's doing, what he's been able to have success with, and just, again, getting better year after year. It's absolutely crazy.
Everyone forgets he won Mr. Ohio football, if I'm not mistaken.
Man, he made the right decision going with basketball, obviously, and not taking those shots playing football. But he could. There's always been that talk of if he could walk out into the NFL and be a tight end, give him a little bit of time to digest the playbook. If he could go out there and do it, honestly, as crazy as this sounds, and it may just be a pie in the sky type of opinion for me, it wouldn't shock me if he could go out there and at the very least be an average NFL tight end or something like that.
No, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
All right, well, maybe he'll go the pro wrestling route at the end of his career, sort of follow the Dennis Rodman footsteps of showing up. There's no WCW for him to go to though, so I don't know. All right, let's go to Wednesday here and look at a few more of these games. Let's talk about your Orlando Magic. They take on the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls are rolling right now, which I imagine there were some people that weren't sure they'd win 6 games all year, and now they've won 6 in a row, and they've beaten some pretty good teams in the process. Beat Boston. Utah's had some injury problems, but they're still a solid bunch. Won on the road at Milwaukee, knocked off a quality 76ers team. What do they get from Orlando here tomorrow night?
It's going to be interesting to see what they get from Orlando. I think Orlando's playing a little bit better than they have in the past. This is still a very injury-depleted team. It's unclear if Aaron Gordon's going to play. He's out. He missed Sunday's game with a calf strain. Evan Fournier is still out with a sprained ankle, although he was recently upgraded to questionable, so maybe his return is more imminent. Jonathan Isaac just came back from an 18-game absence from a sprained ankle on Sunday. So this is a team that's still hurting and still trying to find their rhythm and find their way to compete consistently every single night, or at least through a whole 48 minutes. It's been rough for this Magic team of late. This is a part of the schedule where we all kind of identified that they needed to pick up some wins, and instead they're dealing with injuries. And this is not a team that has a ton of depth where they could deal with multiple injuries to starters. I mean, three guys who started on opening night are out. Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon are out, and then Terrence Ross is still out with a sprained MCL and fracture of his tibial plateau. So it's definitely been a rough go for the Magic. They're a team that just they can't put it all together the whole time. Mario Zonia had his big breakout game on Sunday. He's playing a lot better. He looks like he'll be part of the rotation for at least for the time being, even with Gordon and Isaac coming back. But the Magic need to find a little bit more. Kind of more that the Bulls have found actually. I watched last night's game against Philadelphia. Chicago was down in that game, and then Nikola Mirotic just went on a crazy run. That is a team that fights for everything that they're getting. They scrap really, really hard, and they frustrate teams. I think some teams are probably still taking them a little bit lightly, and they take advantage of that. And so it'll be interesting to see if the Magic can recover. They had a great comeback against Detroit that fell just a little bit short. They've been playing a little bit better on the defensive end. Their offense will still go through long stretches where they just can't score. Their bench is a complete mess, and honestly, I think everyone's turning to Frank Vogel and asking, why aren't you adjusting your rotations to keep a starter in there and keep some consistent offense going? If the Magic can get healthy, if the Magic can get some guys back, maybe that changes the game a little bit for them. But Chicago's playing really, really well right now, and Orlando just frankly isn't.
All right, how about this Miami and Boston game? And as I'm looking here, it's obviously December 19th today. It'll be December 20th tomorrow. That'll be the 11th game in the month of December for Boston. They'll play their 12th on Thursday night against the New York Knicks. So the schedule quite compact here for Boston this month. Miami coming up to town. I sort of looked at this game a little bit on Sunday in my situational betting article and kind of isolated it as maybe a bit of a flat spot for a Boston team that's going to be favored by a pretty healthy amount.
Yeah, it definitely could be. And Boston's coming off a really emotional, draining win last night against Indiana, or Monday night against Indiana. If you didn't see the highlights, Boston lost a 19-point lead and had to get a steal with 4 or 5 seconds left and a dunk by Terry Rozier to win the game. Indiana kind of yucked it up at the end. So Boston survived by the skin of their teeth. Miami, I think, is dealing with some injury issues. Obviously, they've been without Hassan Whiteside for a little while. I think Goran Dragic is hurt, is dealing with a nagging injury as well. So there's obviously Miami's obviously not the team that they were last year in a lot of respects. They're still dangerous, but they've struggled a lot of late. Boston's playing really, really well, so maybe the soft spot in the schedule gets them here a little bit on the road, or wherever the game is. It's in Boston, so maybe it doesn't. But Boston's been a good team. They've been consistent all year, and like you said, they have a lot of depth. So, maybe if Boston's too heavy of a favorite, you stay away. But this is a game that Boston probably feels like they should win.
All right, one more game I want to hit on with you here for Wednesday night, and that's Portland taking on San Antonio. Portland, the host in this game. San Antonio, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, just getting Kawhi Leonard back, trying to work him back in. I think he's played, 2 games now, and those are the only 2 games that he's played so far this season. Greg Popovich knows how this thing goes. We all know he's one of the best coaches in the NBA, knows how to manage his team over the 82-game grind. This game specifically I want to talk about, but also, how long do you feel like it takes San Antonio to hit that, championship stride with Kawhi Leonard back? Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, San Antonio has still played really well, even as they worked Kawhi Leonard back in. They're obviously not perfect quite yet, and I think the Spurs are still being very protective of Leonard. I think he's only playing partial games. He's still on a little bit of a minutes restriction. And, you watch him play and he doesn't quite look like Kawhi yet. He's still working his way back into shape. So it's going to take a little while. And again, you trust Craig Popovich to know how to manage his team and bring them up when they're ready and to get them going in the right direction. So obviously it's going to be a continual process for the Spurs and for Kawhi Leonard to get where they need to be. Portland, though, is a really dangerous team. Obviously, they're coming off of a long losing streak, but they're playing really, really well. I think they won 2 of 4 or 3 of 4 on an East Coast road trip. They lost last night in Minnesota. So they seem to have figured themselves out and righted the ship. They've got Yusuf Nurkic back, so they got their kind of defensive anchor back in the lineup. This is a team that's obviously very dangerous with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum as offensive weapons. This will be their first game back home after that East Coast road trip. So, Portland is a more dangerous team than I think people might give them credit for. This might be an opportunity for them to pick off San Antonio, with San Antonio still trying to figure things out. It's not. I don't know if I've seen if Kawhi is going to play or not. It still seems like it's a day-to-day thing with Kawhi, whether the Spurs decide to rest him or play him. He'll probably play because I think San Antonio played last night. But, it's still obviously a gradual process bringing Kawhi Leonard back in. And while that's still the case, San Antonio is still very good, but it certainly leaves them a little bit vulnerable. Philip-Rossman Reich from Orlando Magic Daily. What's going on over there at Orlando Magic Daily right now, Philip?
Not much. We're trying to figure out what's wrong with the Magic and just trying to figure out if it's really just the injuries or whether there's something much deeper with the team. We're going to be starting looking at trades as the trade season has opened up. And start, we've written a few draft posts already too, as it seems like the Magic season is slipping away here, nearing the midpoint. But we'll be covering the day-to-day stuff going on with the Orlando Magic. So if you're looking to keep updated with them, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com.
But you can follow Philip on Twitter at PhilR². Philip, thank you so much for your time, buddy. We really appreciate it. Lots of good stuff today, and we'll talk to you again soon. Enjoy all the holidays as well.
Thank you very much. Have a happy holidays to yourself too.